Hello everybody, my name is Kason Quisenberry, and today I'm going to teach you what you need to know about enhanced inputs in Unreal Engine 5. Now today's video is a little bit different than normal. It's actually an excerpt from my video, More Need to Know Nodes. But in that video there's about a 20-minute section that goes over enhanced input actions, and I thought it'd be a good idea to make that its own separate video. So if people were interested in only learning about that specific topic, they have a video to go to. But if you'd like to learn about that and some other nodes, feel free to check out that video or just to continue along with this video. With that being said, let's learn what you need to know. This isn't a video you really need to follow along with. You don't have to have Unreal open and copying every single thing that I do. This is more of a video that you can just sit back and watch and just take in all the different techniques and all the different nodes and learn more about Unreal so that you can use the things that you learn in this video for mechanics that you want to make in the future. But if you want to follow along, totally feel free to do so. The only things I'm going to be using for this video is the third-person character blueprint that's from the third-person template. And then the other thing is the input files is, again, just from the third-person character template. So if you do a third-person character template, you should be able to follow along with this video exactly. So the first thing I want to talk about today are inputs, also known as mappings, which is basically just how the player interacts with the controls of the game. So these are just the controls essentially. And so there are three different types. There are the key mapping, there's action mapping, which I talked about in the last video. And then the main one we're going to talk about for this video is enhanced inputs. So if we go to our game and we start up here, we can see that essentially all three of these things do the same thing. So if I hit F, which is our key mapping, we see I'm printing a string that says what it is, key mapping. I press it and I'm holding the key, but it doesn't keep going. It only does it once. And then if I keep tapping, it does it over and over again. And then same thing for our action mapping. Same exact thing. And then finally, same exact thing currently for our enhanced input. Now these two are the more simplistic ways to do it. That's why I went over action mapping in my last video, but not enhanced inputs. Also wasn't super familiar with enhanced inputs at the time because they were relatively new, but now I've had a lot more experience with them. But enhanced inputs have, as you can see, a lot more options and a lot more information that you can do with them. And so we're just going to go over how to set up enhanced inputs and how to fully use enhanced inputs for your game. So first I want to go over how to add input mapping. Now this is not my code. This is code that comes default with the third person character. This is on Event Begin Play. So basically on Event Begin Play, they're adding the controls to the game, which is using the enhanced input system. Enhanced input system is a newer system of controls that I believe started in 5.2 and is only on 5.2 and after. So if you're using a early version of Unreal 5 or Unreal 4, that you can't, use enhanced inputs, but you can for this. So if we look at this, the way they do it is that they get the controller, and then what you're going to do is cast to the player controllers, and then you are going to, off this, get enhanced user local player subsystem, and that's how you get this node. It's just, again, typing it again, all very simple. Off of that, we do an isValid node. And then finally, this node, which is add mapping context. This is actually how we decide what enhanced input system that we're using. So as you can see, we have mapping context here and we only have one here. So this is just the basic setup for how to add input mapping. If you're using the default player character for either the first person or third person template, that's already going to be there. If you're making a character from scratch, you can literally just copy this code and it'll work the exact same. And you can do it on Event Begin Play, or as I'll show in a little bit, you can do it on a custom event. Now we're going to go over why the enhanced input system is so powerful and how you can use it. So if we go out here, this is again included with the third person character, but I'll show you how to make it just in case you're making a character from scratch or wanting to make a character from scratch, is that it has this, which is called a input mapping context, which you can get by right clicking and then going to where it says input right here, and then going to input mapping context, and you'll make a new one. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and just make an entirely new control system. That way I can show start to finish how to do things. So we're going to do IMC, which stands for input mapping context underscore. I'm just going to call this one test. And with the default templates, you also get this folder called actions. This is where we're going to have our input action. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a new one for test. And these have IA underscore for input action. So I'm going to, again, go to input action. And then I have that. And then I'm going to open it up. And you're actually good to go if you're doing just a normal, press button and then thing happens. You can just use the basic default. However, if you're doing more complex controls, you can do other things. So for example, if you're doing something with movement, we're going to want to look in here. And as you can see, you can change this to get different things. So for movement, you're going to want an axis 2D, which is a vector 2D, but you can do a bunch of different things. So for most of them, you're just going to want digital, which is bool, but you can also do a axis 1D, which is just a float, axis 2D, which is a 2D vector, and then axis 3D, which is a 3D vector. So it all depends on what kind of information you want to get from your enhanced input. If you just want a bool that says, hey, this is being pressed, or this is not being pressed, you're just going to want to get digital bool. If you're going to want to get some sort of number value, such as, whether a number is positive or negative to determine whether or not you should move forward or backwards, you're going to want to get a axis 2D. For an axis 1D, I don't really know typically what someone would use for that. I've never seen someone use them, and I've never used one myself. Axis 3D could be used if you're having, flying controls for like a spaceship or rocket ship, or just like a flying, player character. So again, you can do a bunch of different things with that. And the rest of the settings you can, leave normal. This is going to be the main one that changes things. You can add a description that says like what this button will be doing, but honestly, if you just name it correctly, and then when you put it into your actual code, comment it, you probably don't need to, but it's a good use to have that there. Trigger when paused, you can also override this in a lot of different other places, but this will basically, if you're doing a pause button, you'll obviously want that to trigger when paused. Or if there's some sort of button press that you want to do when pause, you would just check this to be true. And then there's triggers and modifiers, but we're not going to actually do these here. We can do these in another place. I'll show you in a second. And then there's some advanced things, which again, probably just leave default. Input consumption, probably just want to leave as default. And then user settings, again, probably just want to leave at default. So then if we go back to our input mapping context, open it up, you'll see that we currently have no mappings. So what we can do here is hit add. That's going to add a new control to this mapping context that we can then later use for characters. And so if you go here, you see this drop-down menu, and you see it's going to have all of the input actions that we have listed. So we're going to get the test one right here. We're going to hit save. And then if you go here, as you can see, if this is like controls what the click is. So you can just go through all of the individual buttons if you want. It has, like a keyboard, like you can literally go through every single key on the keyboard. You can also go through every single button on the gamepad or the mouse, or you can click this little icon, and then if you click that, it'll glow yellow. And then if you click a button, let's say that we want it to be D, then that is going to make that control. And then for this specific example, I'm going to leave this here, but I'm going to explain what these do. So this is the trigger and this is the modifier. So we're going to go to the other one just to show off. So we're going to go to the default one, and we have all of our controls here. So if we go to move, you see we have all the movement controls, including W. So if we go here, we'll talk about modifiers first, then go to triggers. We have modifiers. And so what we can do here is that there's a bunch of different modifiers that do a lot of different things. I'm not going to explain all of them just because, there's a lot of them, but each one has different documentation that you can read just by hovering over it. Or you can, of course, Google to find Unreal's official documentation. But most likely, again, these are for very specific uses, and you probably won't need them for all of them. So for movement, all you're going to need to do is swizzle input axis values, because what that does is that gets a certain value when the key is pressed. So basically for this one, when we press W, it's going to get a 1, because that is what we need to know that we need to move forward. So that's what that does. And then if we go to S, which is what we need to use backwards, we see we have two modifiers. One is the swizzle input axis values, which gives us a number, this case being 1. Then we add a second one, which is called negate. Now this is just going to basically say, take the number from this one and then times it by -1, which in that case an when we press S, we're going to get -1. And that's how we know to move backwards rather than forwards. Now for triggers, again, there's a lot of triggers. Now these basically a way for the player to interact with the control. So for example, there is hold. So maybe you want them to be able to hold the button for X amount of seconds to do a super attack. So then you would press hold, and then you would press hold, and then you would hit this button, and you get a lot of different settings. So hold time threshold, that's how long they need to hold it for said action to occur. Is it a one shot, meaning should you only fire at this once, or should you do it every single frame once the hold threshold is done? And then some different time. And then this is whether or not it should be applied to delta seconds. That's a bit complicated, so don't worry about that. and then the point at which the trigger fires. So once the hold threshold is met, how long until you do the, action attack? Because maybe you have, you want to do like 0.5 seconds to let an animation build up, or just to like, you want to give it 0.5 seconds so that when they release the button, doesn't immediately do it. As you can see, there's a lot of them. So I'm not going to go all over them, but tap basically just means like you tap it fast and how fast you have to tap it to get it. Because maybe the player has to press something really quick for like a really quick attack to happen. Then there's release, basically saying that the action is not triggered until you release the button. There's hold and release, which is a combination of holds. So you have to hold for a certain amount of time and then you can release it. And then the rest of them are a bit more specific. The combo is for a classic video game combo, but it's sort of in beta. And you can also do these programmatically if you want, but that's why the enhanced input system is so powerful, is it has a lot of these tools built in, where in the past you'd have to program the hold and the program, the release and different stuff like that. So this allows you to not have to program this stuff and just have some quick settings that you can deal with, which saves you a lot of time. So I'm going to delete this because I just want it to be a normal input. And then we're going to go experiment. So for now, I'm going to just change this mapping context to our new one, just so we can test that out. And so to get the input action, so basically to actually get this IA_test, all you have to do is go here. You can do IA_ and then test, and then it'll come up. And there's two different nodes for it. There is the enhanced action input event, which gives you the actual thing that you need. So this is the actual event that would trigger it. And then the other thing it gives you is the value of this, which for this return value, basically what it's saying is because it's a digital bool, it gives you whether or not the button is being pressed. If you were to do an axis 2D, it would allow you to get what number is currently being in both the X and Y axis. If you were to do an axis 1D, it would give you that float. If you were to do an axis 3D, it would give you that vector. So it just gives you whatever the current value of the button is. So this is helpful if you want, maybe you can only open a door if you're holding a certain button, and you could use this or something like that. I personally have never really used these. I usually would just set the variable that I'm doing the action inside of this, but this could perhaps be useful to you. So this is with no triggers and no modifies, and we're just going to I'm just going to show you what it does on the default. So we're just going to go print string, and we're going to put it on this trigger. So again, there's trigger, started, ongoing, canceled, and completed. And we're just going to go through each one of them so you can see it. And we'll put, and again, because I switched the IMC to the one that we just made, I don't have any of the other controls. So if I hit W, nothing. If I hit A, nothing. Hit S, nothing. Right? Because I can't move or go backwards because I no longer am connected to that input mapping context. I am not with the default, I am now with the test. And with the test, we have D, which as you can see, will print a string called enhanced text. Now, as long as I hold the button, it's going to do this every single frame because it has no modifier and it has no trigger. So it's just going to do it every single frame that it's being pressed. So again, bop, 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 bop. Now, another important thing to note is that the key mapping that we had and the action mapping that we have still work, even though we change the context. So key map works, action maps works. So that works regardless of whether or not you use the IMC. So just to let you know, if you switch the IMC, if you have any part of your controls that are on a action mapping or a key mapping, it's going to be completely different. I highly recommend that you choose one of the three systems, whichever one works the best for you, and using that all the way out through the game. That way there's no things that you could possibly miss. All right, so now let's say that we go to started. So again, triggered basically says when this button is being pressed, do this action, and it does it for every single frame that the button is being pressed. But let's go to started. So if I press D now, it only prints it once. So basically the same thing as an action mapping, same thing as, wrong button, same thing as a key mapping. So same as these, and it doesn't matter if you hold it or do anything. So a good way to think about it is that this triggered is your event tick, and then started is your event begin play. It only activates when you first begin to press the button. So event tick, event begin play. All right, now I'm going to skip ongoing. I'm going to skip canceled because those have to do with holding. I'm going to go to completed. So I press the button. I'm holding the button, nothing happened. Nothing happened when I first pressed the button. Nothing's happening now, but then I release the button, and then the thing happens. So to the naked eye right now, if you were to look at it, it looks the exact same as the other, but it's doing it not when I first press the button, but when I first stop pressing the button. So another way to think about this is that it's just like the action mappings release or the key mappings release, but it's just changed to the word completed. Now, just to show it, we're going to go over the hold function because ongoing and canceled are very much tied with that. So let's go back to, again, our IMC test. Let's add a trigger. Let's go to hold. Let's go to hold and release, actually. Hold and release. And then we're going to customize it to where hold time threshold will be 1 second. So I have to hold the button for 1 second, and then it's going to trigger 0.2 seconds after the threshold is met. So now if I go to triggered, and you see I press the button rapidly, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. I hold the button, nothing happens, and then I release it and it works. But I'm going to, okay, so hold it, and then I release. So I hold it and I release, but then I hold it for 1 second, and then release, and then it happens. We've changed the triggered event by adding a new trigger here. And you can have multiple triggers as well, but again, it can, that would get a little complicated, and there's typically no need to do that. But again, if you're doing a very specific controller, very specific mechanic, feel free to have multiple triggers and multiple modifiers. Now we're going to go to ongoing and canceled. So let's say that while we're holding the button, we want to, maybe add 0.01 to a value to make a value go up or something like that every single frame that we hold the button. Let's go here, and then we're going to call this ongoing. So this is off the ongoing output. All right, now let's go back to the ongoing and the canceled buttons to see what those do with the context that we now have a holding feature. So we're going to go here. We're going to do D, and as you can see, ongoing, ongoing, ongoing. So this, and then when I release, enhance input. So basically this acts as the triggered or the event tick while we have a trigger. It's a little bit confusing because everything is called triggered. But basically when the triggered is changed here to hold and release, this changes and this ongoing becomes the new event tick. So this is useful if, say, you hold to heal, right? But when you, release, maybe you get a big healing boost or something like that. If you wanted to where you heal while you're holding the button, you could change it to ongoing. Every frame you get 0.01 health back or something like that. And now let's see what cancel does. So you might say, what is cancel doing? So canceled is every time that you don't meet the hold threshold and you release the button. So basically, if you prematurely release the button, it will be considered canceled, and that goes on the canceled event. So that's useful to say, like when you first start the button, which again you can use start. You can use start with all of these. That doesn't change. You can always use started. So maybe when you start pressing the button, your character goes into some sort of super cool fighting stance to like do a charge pose or something like that. And then they release the button, right? You then use the canceled output to then make them go back to their idle animation or something like that. That's basically every single thing that you can get from the different output nodes of the enhanced input. Again, very powerful tool. For a lot of this, if you were to use, these type of inputs, you'd have to do a whole lot more programming to accomplish the same effect as just using the input actions. For all of them. So again, very, very powerful system that's going to save you a lot of time. Now I'm just going to copy this code. And then we're going to make, instead of doing a Vim begin play, we're going to do a custom can play, and we're going to do change controls. And I'm just going to do that after this. I'm going to change this from test to default. So this is basically going to change it from the one we're using where we can't move or anything to the default controls. And so let's do it off of triggered. So right now, again, I can't move and D does something, but now when I activate it, I can't move. So we just saw the input mapping context change from one to another. So again, just to show, can't walk, can't walk, can't walk, can't walk, can't walk, can't jump, can't even look around using my mouse. And then I hit D, and then I can move, I can jump, and I can look around with my mouse. So this allows us to change the controls of our character programmatically, which is really, really powerful depending on what type of game you're using. Now, for most games, you probably won't use this, especially if you're creating a smaller game. You're probably going to have the same controls throughout the game. But this is very useful for a variety of reasons. So say that you're making, like a GTA style game where your player can walk around and then he can enter a car. So before, when you use these controls, you would basically have to have a lot of booleans or some sort of system that would change, pressing W for moving the character to pressing W to moving the car. With this system, instead, what you can do is when you enter the car, you can do the change controls to then do, IMC underscore car. And so you can completely change the control mapping from regular player character to car, and then when they exit the car, change it back to regular character. Or, if you have different controls for different classes of characters, say that you have a paladin, you have a sorcerer, and they have different controls, you can switch that in, say, like the character select menu. Or even like a more minor thing, like say that your character is walking around and they go into water, you can change from walking normal controls to now swimming controls. And you can basically have a lot more control over how your character plays and how your character controls without having to do a lot of unnecessary programming thanks to the enhanced input system. All right, so that is going to be it for the enhanced input section. I'm going to change this back to default so we just move by default. The last thing I want to go over with inputs is what's called a debug key, which I should have mentioned this in my debug video that I made a bit ago. But I forgot about them, honestly, until a friend reminded me about them. So let me show you about them here. So let's change this to F, and I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of these three. So what this does is this is a debug key. So this is a very good, useful debug tool or a tool to use while you're developing a game, but not when you actually release the game. So let's say, again, we're going to print string. Let's say we need some important information like the character's world location. So get actor location, and then we're just going to plug that into the print string. And so every time that we press the F key, it's going to show that. So, I go here, I press F, it prints the location. I then move forward, it changes the location. I can move, up here, changes that. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between a debug key mapping and a key mapping? Well, a debug key will not work if you package the game under the development. So if you don't know about packaging, you can go watch my packaging video because there I'll basically explain more stuff. But basically when you package the game, so let's go here and you package it under development. When you go to package the game and you package it under shipping, which means like you're going to ship the game, it's the final game, that key will not be registered by the program. It basically deletes that key from the players being able to use it. So that way you don't have to remove all of your debug tools at the end of development, so that your players don't, press all the debug keys and mess up the game. All right, that's going to do it for today's video. Again, if you want to learn about more nodes, you can check out the video that excerpt comes from. I probably won't do many more videos like this. That section just really stuck out when I was rewatching it as a section that could be a really good standalone video. But I'm going to be making more original videos going on, so feel free to look out for that. And I hope you enjoy making things in Unreal Engine 5.